Hello and welcome to a special edition of Palace Confidential. I'm Jo Elvin and today we will be looking back on our coverage of the royal family over the past year, from the highs to the lows, and as always our experts have plenty to say on the Queen, Prince Andrew, Harry and Meghan and much more. And stick around for later in the show when we'll be looking at some of our favourite pictures from 2022. We'll kick things off now with the news that Prince Andrew had agreed a settlement with Virginia Guiffre, who was a victim of sex trafficker Jeffrey Epstein. The Duke denied all wrongdoing, but did pay a settlement believed to be worth millions of pounds. Here are Charlotte Griffiths and Guy Adams on that, Miss Giuffre's settlement statement.
Prince Andrew's out-of-court settlement to Virginia Guiffre is the latest disgrace for the Queen's second son. Questions over the amount of money and who will be funding it have been on the lips of the nation ever since. Charlotte, let's start with you. The figure rumoured to be in the region of £10–12 million. This is, of course, an out-of-court settlement with Mrs Guiffre, who's accused him of raping her when she was 17. The Prince has always denied these claims. Have you been surprised by everything that's happened this week?
I've been surprised by the speed with which all of this has happened. I'm certainly surprised that it's happened now, not in March when it was going to go to deposition. And I'm really surprised Andrew didn't get his day in court. He was determined to get his day in court. And something must have happened very suddenly. And it feels like a surrender, but not a surrender to Virginia, but a surrender perhaps to some forces behind the scenes within the royal family, namely Camilla, Charles and the Queen, who must have just said, we've got to get this sorted now.
So you think it's definitely pressure from family?
I think there's been some pressure behind the scenes and there's been a sudden change of tack and it's just happened so quickly. And yeah, so surprised, definitely.
And Guy, this, as Charlotte was saying, comes just a week after the Duke vowed to contest these claims in a public trial in the US. There's been a complete U-turn. And you've talked in articles for the paper about the fact that nothing in the Duke's statement clearly exonerates him.
Yeah, it's a very odd statement. Normally, you cover these kind of legal declarations. Normally, the chap writing the cheque will get to insert a clause in the statement saying something along the lines of, you know, he continues to profess his innocence, or there is no evidence, or da-da-da. There's not a single line like that in the statement that was released on Tuesday night. And that shows, I suppose, the sort of the really abject nature of the surrender. He's not only written a vast cheque, but he's also essentially not been allowed to insert any line that might make it look like he's done anything apart from wave a white flag.
And of course, you know, a substantial amount of money to Virginia Guiffre's charity. Some might say, you know, she will be pleased with that. She will feel vindicated. Others may say, you know, for true justice, perhaps the day in court would have been a sort of landmark case a lot of victims of sexual abuse would have wanted.
I think the court of opinion actually has gone towards Virginia. They haven't said he didn't. You settled and you should have had your day in court. I think people realise that she has been exonerated, and Andrew, it was a very contrite statement.
And also, I mean, from Andrew's point of view, you're right, it was a very contrite statement. There has been a sort of school of thought, a lot of royal pundits have been saying, you know, on the television and whatnot, yes, this is terrible, it looks bad, but actually from the royal family's point of view, it's the least worst the least worst step he could have taken. I completely disagree with that. I think this is a terrible, terrible step. I think if you are accused of a crime or a behaviour as terrible as Andrew was accused of, really the least worst step is to go to court and to win. And I am amazed that he didn't. I think, look, you know, America isn't some sort of banana republic with a corrupt court system that doesn't work. It's a mature democracy with a very robust court system. If, as he claims, he never met this woman, or as he has claimed in the past, he never met this woman, this was all lies, then he should have been very confident to go to court, and he should have been very, very confident of victory. I'm baffled actually that he's declared this sort of this payoff's been announced so quickly.
I think that's why he wanted to go to court, isn't it? Yeah. I think he thought that, you know, he thought if I get there, I can win this. And something must have happened to stop him in his tracks.
Do you think that how you say a lot of people will be feeling the same about this sort of complete U-turn? Do you agree with Charlotte that actually it was pressure from the family that sort of made him take this step?
I mean, who knows? I can see it's quite convenient. You could be seen as quite convenient to kind of clear the decks. The Queen's Jubilee is coming up in June. You don't want this to be, you certainly wouldn't want a court case to be happening at that very moment. My only sort of question is, does this really clear the decks? I'm not sure it does, because this stain will hang over the royal family forever, really. And you know, as long as we're debating who's actually paying this money, where it's come from, it will continue to be a news story, and that could carry on for quite a long time.
Well, for the Queen, Accession Day was always important, and for what turned out to be her last, she announced that she would like her daughter-in-law Camilla to be known as Queen Consort when Charles became king. Here are Dr. Tessa Dunlop and Richard Eden discussing this important symbolic moment.
Tessa, now, it's easy to be blasé about a little title change from Princess Consort to Queen, but it's a big deal, isn't it?
Yeah, and something that I think behind the scenes Charles has longed for, really from the get-go. And it's sort of a victory by stealth, effectively. And in many respects, I think I feel for them. I feel this is probably the right move, the fair move to make. They were encumbered by being in love with Charles, trapped in an institution designed to preserve tradition, convention, not instigate change, in a period when we've never seen so much social change.
Yeah.
You know, they would have, I think, married in the early 1970s, or at least given their relationship a bit of a shot, had it not been for the carbuncle that was, oh, we're the House of Windsor. So I think it was ghastly, in the words of my mother, what happened over the preceding 20 years, but not entirely of their making alone.
Richard, we did discuss last week the impact of Harry's book. Do you think that some of this move is you know, premeditated in heading off any complications from any revelations in that book?
I think it is really, yes. I mean, it's something which Charles has wanted for many years, and I think any resistance to the idea of Camilla becoming Queen, it is dissipated really by this announcement. It means, you know, most people think, well, if it's good enough for the Queen, it's good enough for me. And it will make a huge difference to public opinion, I think. I mean, remember last week we spoke about how only 14% of the British public thought Camilla should be Queen. But I think that will change. We've seen it already. It's starting to change a lot. And I think the Queen will make the difference in that regard.
Let's talk about the princes for a second now. The responses from Harry and William were interesting and have sort of raised conversation, but do you think that they were bypassed from this decision-making process?
The silence is interesting. I mean, Harry didn't, from what I gather, he hasn't even sort of said congratulations on a 70-year reign, not even a sort of, you know, repost of the Queen's statement as, you know, our servant, which is how she signed herself off. And I thought that was a sign, really, that he's got himself in a bit of a knot, hasn't he? He's a bit rabbit in headlights at the moment. What do you reckon, Richard?
I just think, I mean, wasn't it incredibly selfless of the Queen to make this announcement? It was her big day, it was the accession day, it should be all about her, and instead she's made it about Charles and about Camilla. And it really seems to say so much that, you know, all the headlines then became about Queen Camilla, and it's really why we valued the Queen so much. I mean, I think with Harry, now it doesn't really matter.
Do you not think it matters what the, you know, particularly the next king thinks about this?
I think certainly it does, and I think we've had supportive noises, certainly been reported that it's something that William supports. But in Harry's case, I think the book will be, there will be revelations. It's all going to be about his feelings about his marriage, about his parents' marriage and how that affected him. So it is going to drag it all up again. But I think this announcement by the Queen means that that's kind of by the by. It's not, it won't have any great impact.
I wonder to what extent the Queen, I mean, I know we hold her up there as exemplary and 70 years of service, etc., but she doesn't also feel some remorse that, you know, times have now changed. Looking back, you know, she couldn't be expected to lead that change. That's not really the role of the monarchy. But I do think there's a bit of compassion around what happened to Charles.
Or do you think that there's just a bit of resignation that she can't, you know, times have moved on around her? What does it say about the state of modern monarchy and the times we live in that
well,
she's made this decision.
it's been a really tough gig for the Queen. She has lived in peace times, and naturally, as sort of the leader, the colonel-in-chief of the army, you know, weirdly, war always perversely benefits a monarchy, especially if a victorious war, whereas the Queen's had not only peace times, but massive, never seen before social change. So it's not just Charles, remember, it was her sister, Margaret.
Yeah.
It seemed crazy within a matter of years that Margaret hadn't been allowed to marry Peter Townsend. And the same again. And then, and of course, the main victim was Diana. But Charles was also kind of, I mean, there was a bit of weakness there as well. He could have arguably led. But look how Edward tried to lead on the front of who he wanted to marry, and he ended up turfed out. It was a real tricky one.
I don't normally sort of like get in with my oar in these things, but my opinion on this is I feel like it's one of the greatest love stories of modern times. They've clearly been in love all this time. Don't you have any sympathy for the fact that this is the couple who should have been together all along?
Well, they are together, and she...
They are, and so let her be
the Queen.
Where's your compassion?
Yeah.
This was unrequited love. This was kind of... I mean, if we look at Meghan and Harry as victims of the institution, arguably Camilla and Charles and Diana as well, they were all victims of this rigid institution. There was still this weird idea in the 70s you had to be a sort of fairy virgin princess.
Well, I think Camilla was always going to be Queen. You know, if you're married to the King, you are the Queen. That was the way it is. They just came up with this sort of formula of, oh, she's going to be Princess Consort. And it seemed to be just a sort of bit of an underhand way of getting around.
That's the thing, don't you think that was a
opposition.
placating placeholder for society to warm up to her?
Yeah, and Charles never liked that. And, I mean, we heard from Harry and Meghan, I think one of their bugbears was that Charles seemed to care far more about acceptance of Camilla than he did, you know, any of their problems.
But the Platinum Jubilee celebrations were years in the organising, with Courtiers considering every last eventuality. So the seating plan for the Thanksgiving service at St Paul's was fascinating and gave Victoria Murphy and Richard Eden lots to talk about.
Richard, I hear you have been inundated with theories about a particular seating plan.
Well, everybody's been intrigued by the seating plan at St Paul's Cathedral. It was genuinely fascinating, because even though the royal family were very keen to make sure that Harry and Meghan were mentioned in the court circular, that's the first time for a couple of years, and directly after the Duke and Duchess of Cambridge, so they kept with the order of precedence. Well, that went out of the window in the service. What we saw in the service was they were relegated to the second row. So even though, you know, he's the brother of the future Queen, he had to sit behind the Queen's cousins who come far down the line of precedence, you know, behind the Duke of Kent and the Duke of Gloucester, and there they were tucked away. But what's particularly intriguing is Harry and Meghan arrived separately. They didn't arrive in the minibus with the minor royals. They had a car, so maybe that's something that was generously given to them, organised, you know, by the Queen. But it meant that they arrived separately, so they had a sort of grand entrance. But when they got there, it was all the seats were sort of taken, so they couldn't seat be seated at the end of the row. People had to get up. It was like when you arrive late at the cinema or something, and people have to get their popcorn and stand up. You know.
And you think that? Do you think there's meaning in that, or do you think that's just, you know? Do you think that they would have had assigned seats or just been told you're on that row?
From what I've told, there really was. So why it was, so there's Beatrice and Eugenie didn't move. They didn't sort of move down the row to let them in. They stuck to their seats. And that's because when they left, there was a procession to leave the cathedral, and it meant that Harry and Meghan were far behind. They had to wait for everyone else in their row to leave first. So they couldn't be photographed. They weren't in the same shots as Prince Charles or the Cambridges. They were nowhere near them, and that was very much deliberate.
And you think that was orchestrated?
Yeah, I think the seating, I'm sure, was decided in advance, and I think it's hard not to look at it as a sign, you know, if not a symbol of the distance between the brothers, you know, that physical distance between them in that seating plan, and the fact that it also meant that there was no picture that could be taken that showed them all in the same frame, that showed the Sussexes directly behind the Cambridges and Charles and Camilla. You haven't, this whole weekend, we haven't had a photograph of William and Harry in the same picture, apart from those wide shots of the cathedral.
Do you think, this might be a really unfair question, but do you think that's a case of either of the brothers saying, fine, I'm coming, but make sure I'm not photographed anywhere near them? Or do you think it's a case of the palace institutions saying, do you know what, let's just not even let's make sure that's not a media construct? Which one is it?
I suspect it was a combination of the two, but certainly we saw that William and Catherine had nothing to do with them at all while they were here.
Yeah.
Now that's a big thing. I mean, in the lead up to this, the weeks before, we've had loads of stories appearing about how Harry and William are starting actually to sort of mend fences a bit, and they've been in touch.
Like it.
I didn't see any of that, no. And one thing I ought to add, which was a bit naughty, but I did note on Twitter that directly behind Harry and Meghan was seated the former head of the security service. He's the former MI5 boss, Andrew Parker, Lord Parker. So he was keeping a beady eye on Harry and Meghan from behind.
Oh, not there to protect them. There to protect everybody else.
Yes, maybe to protect them, to give them that security that they asked for.
Yeah, I mean, I think given the fact that you had sort of this weekend as an opportunity for the family to kind of show unity and for everyone to show togetherness, I think it is quite telling that clearly William and Harry did not consciously at any point make an effort to be seen side by side, to be seen in the same frame.
In what was a very busy year for royal books, Revenge by Tom Bower was amongst the most anticipated. Tom sat down for a special interview with Palace Confidential, and here's his version of events on the reported tearful bust-up between Catherine and Meghan.
You do address in the book a couple of big disputed talking points. The first is the tears during the bridesmaids' fitting of the royal wedding. Now, in your version, it was an exhausted Kate who was driven to tears, and her attempt at reconciliation was rebuffed. And then, of course, we have Meghan talking on the Oprah interview about how it was actually Kate who made her cry. What's your story?
Well, the problem with Meghan's version is that she's told so many untruths in the Oprah interview, whether about race, that she said that she wasn't really married that day in Windsor, they'd been married 3 days before, about protection, security, all these sort of things, that you have to take everything she says on that said in that day with a pinch of salt. And when it comes to who made who cry, I'd believe Kate any day, because in my book, Kate is a hero and a great woman, and I don't believe that she would go out of her way to disparage Meghan. Whereas by then, of course, Meghan was accused of bullying the staff, which really did hurt Kate a lot, and was accused of misbehaving. So I wouldn't believe Meghan's version of that.
So is it your opinion that's in the book, or did you?
No, I found sources.
Yeah.
I mean, of course, I talked to sources.
Yeah.
But of course, sources could invent as well. But I prefer to believe them rather than Meghan.
Fair enough. Then the second thing I want to discuss is that famous royal racism claims that you just touched on. You suggest that Harry actually laughed off questions from his family about what a child of his and Meghan might look like, and it was only his mood changing when he discussed it with Meghan, who did not see the funny side at all.
Well, the most important point, two important points. One is, it's quite normal for parents, grandparents, family saying, what will your new child be like? At the point of that discussion, even on Harry's version, especially Harry's version, they debate what any future child would look like long before he'd even proposed marriage to Meghan. But on Meghan's version in the Oprah interview, the conversation happened when she was pregnant. Now, who do you believe? Clearly, Harry is so stupid he wouldn't actually tell a lie about something like that. So I believe that, and I think Meghan used his recollection of that. You know, I don't think it was a serious conversation. It was just one sort of passing mention, to use that to attack the royal family. And that was, I thought, unforgivable. And unforgivable not for Winfrey not to investigate it further to see about the contradiction between Harry's version and Meghan's version. She just let Meghan's version go by the ball, and I think that was wrong. But I thought that was a terrible indictment of Meghan, to actually spin the story, which according to Harry, and he's the original source, was untrue, and cast terrible cloud over the royal family, and to this day.
Well, do you imagine a day when we might ever get to the bottom of who allegedly said this terrible
Well,
thing?
there are hints in the book. I won't talk about it. There are hints in the book.
Well, watch this space.
Well, following the sad death of Her Majesty the Queen in September, Kate Mansi and Richard Eden share their stories about the late monarch Queen and what the coming days will bring for our new King Charles.
It's interesting because I think it does bring up a lot of emotion and grief for people that's possibly not related to the Queen when you think about your own family. But there was that quite powerful image of Harry, wasn't there, leaving Balmoral? And one has to wonder, many will be hoping that this is the event that brings that family back together. Do you think that's possible?
It would be nice to think that for sort of sentimental reasons and the idea of a death bringing people together again. But I have to say, I'm sorry, it's not, I know it's not really the thing people want to hear, but I don't think it will happen. In the sense that, just look at it, you know, Harry travelled alone. Prince William went up to Scotland with his uncles Edward, Andrew, and with his aunt Sophie, whereas Harry made his way alone with his security guards. He stayed at Balmoral. He got there sadly too late to see his grandmother before she died, and he was there apparently for 12 hours, 8 p.m. to 8 a.m. Then he's straight out. I mean, did he actually, you know, even have breakfast with his brother? To be honest, I doubt it. And I think they are keeping him at arm's length. And who can blame them with the series of interviews they give and not knowing what's going to be repeated in interviews or on some new Netflix programme? You know, it's understandable, isn't it?
It's the dreadful timing we always feared, isn't it, Kate?
Yes, I think it is. But, you know, in the aftermath of the Queen's death, it's nice to kind of concentrate on, you know, the highlights and the good points. Like Richard, you know, would like to think that this could be a reunification of the family, that perhaps it is a point at which they can put aside their differences and forge a new way forward. But we were just talking before we came on air about our own recollections, and like you said before, it's very personal because it does remind people of their own grandmothers, their own mothers, and you know, this is somebody who looms large. I'm sure everybody at some stages had a dream about the Queen. It's very personal, and we, you know, she's part of our lives in a very real way. Yes, okay, many of us have never met her, but that's not to say that she doesn't still loom large in our personal life. And I was just sharing with Richard before we came on an anecdote about having been very lucky to have met the Queen on a couple of occasions, and one was in the run-up to the Diamond Jubilee. And I said to her, you know, what do you say to the Queen? And I said, well, I've met with Lord Salisbury, and he's very excited about putting together the river pageant. Do you remember that wonderful kind of river pageant? The weather wasn't great, but it was a fantastic display of all the boats along the Thames. And she said, oh, yes, I know, he's getting quite worked up about it, and had a real giggle. And there was just this sense of kind of mischievousness about her. I mean, just warmth and such humour, and that's what that always shone through. We may not have always thought known what the Queen thought about things politically, but we knew. I think we all had a really good sense of her personality and how much she cared.
Yeah.
Now, I understand. Let's think about what might be the next steps in the next few days. Kate, I understand we are expecting Charles to greet mourners from now.
Yeah, so today we're going to see King Charles III.
Isn't it weird? I mean,
which I had to take a pause then because it's still strange to say it. But it will become normal and natural, and they've been planning this transition for a long time. So, as we know, in February, the Queen, on her accession day, said that it was her sincere wish that Camilla should be known as Queen Consort when the time comes. So these little kind of points along the way have been preparing us for this moment, but nothing truly prepares you because it's still a shock, even though, yes, she was 96. Yes, we know that she'd had mobility issues and had some ill health, but it's still strange when it happens. So we're going to see King Charles greeting mourners, having a look through some of the floral tributes, and then tomorrow will be the tomorrow, Saturday, will be the accession day. I'm still confused because I keep thinking Palace is on a Thursday, but obviously it's Friday today.
It's a special one.
So tomorrow will be the accession day, when we'll have the kind of first big ceremony of Charles as king at St James's Palace. And I think that's going to be a real moment, and important that we see this in action, and everyone can kind of come to terms with the fact that we have a new monarch on the throne.
Well, after months of speculation, the Harry and Meghan docuseries finally arrived, provoking huge controversy. Here are Richard Eden and Charlotte Griffiths sharing their first impressions.
At 2 points, Richard, Harry talks about second families. 2 second families, the first one in Africa, the later one in the army. That seemed a bit pointed as well.
Pretty much everything he says about his own family in this series so far is pointed. You know, we've got Meghan with her mother, which is still a really warm, loving relationship and comes across really positively, yet there's no one for Harry. And what we see here is talking about Lesotho and how he founded his charity for orphans there that have been orphaned by AIDS, with a prince in Lesotho, and he talks about, this was my second family, and he actually says extraordinary things like, they raised me, he says at one point. This was they were like family to me. And that was why he was so keen to take Meghan to Botswana, I think, to Africa, as almost like a sort of test to see, does she kind of fit in there as much as I did?
But then moments later she says, oh, the Botswana thing was an accident. He had a week off and I just happened to have the same week off. So, it was a complete accident and a fluke that we ended up going to Botswana.
And also I should say that he wasn't, Meghan wasn't the first girlfriend that he'd taken to Africa either.
Yeah, no, that's very true.
So Botswana's the job interview.
Kind of thing.
Oh. But Charlotte, the picture of the royal family as a family is pretty austere in this. Meghan talks about hosting William and Kate in ripped jeans and bare feet, and that the formality on the outside carried through on the inside. So they don't come out looking great, do they?
Yeah, they do come across looking austere. And as he said that, he cut to a picture of the Queen giving a speech. Well, that's the Queen giving a speech, so she is going to look austere, and it's kind of her job to do so. And probably the first time Meghan met the Queen, there would have been a bit of distance there because she is the Queen, There's nobody more austere, and we kind of love her for it. But as I gather from people, when you get to know the Queen a bit better, you kind of get to know her, and those edges soften a little bit. And the same with Kate. I would argue I would not meet my sister-in-law for the first time wearing ripped jeans and no shoes. I think that's almost disrespectful.
Why? Why wouldn't you?
Because it's kind of rude. You're meeting somebody for the first time and you're just there with no shoes on.
I bet they're very expensive
It's like,
jeans.
hey, how's it going? I would bother to put some shoes on, that's all I'm saying. And I bet Kate probably was a bit sort of formal at first, but I'm sure if you get to know Kate and she warms to you, that she can soften up in due course.
Gosh, you're a tougher crowd than I am, Charlotte Griffiths.
And when she made that comment, they did show directly to William and Catherine, so there was no doubt who that was aimed at, and they really do have it in for them.
Maybe they were just being very polite, English people like Kate are very polite when you first meet them for the first time. It's not full warmth and hugs and let me take my shoes off too, let's just all dance around barefoot, Of course she's going to be like that the first time.
I'm nervously sort of thinking about, my family, how did they embrace people, we're not great huggers. Okay, I'm sorry, I'm not really a great hugger myself, but neither. Don't hang me for it, please.
Thank you for watching our special year-end wrap-up. From everyone here at Palace Confidential, we'd like to wish you a very happy new year, and we have plenty of royal news to look forward to in 2023, including King Charles's coronation, Prince Harry's memoir, and we hope you'll continue watching. Meanwhile, it's montage time, and to celebrate 2022, we've decided to bring you the best photos of the royal family from January right up to December. Enjoy those, and we'll see you next year. Bye-bye.